Forward. There is one emotional mistake that can make a deeply empathetic person stop seeing you the same way forever. They may forgive lies. They may forgive distance. They may forgive anger. Forward. Mixed signals, emotional shutdowns, and even rejection. They may spend months trying to understand why you act the way you do. But there is a point where something changes. Forward. Not because they suddenly become cold, not because they stop caring, but because they realize that the one thing they gave you in complete trust was not protected. Forward. That thing is the vulnerability. A super empath can spend an enormous amount of emotional energy understanding another person. They notice small changes in tone. Forward. They sense when someone is uncomfortable. They recognize pain behind anger. They often see fear underneath emotional distance. Forward. They can understand behavior that other people simply call selfish, confusing, or cruel. Forward. This is one reason highly empathetic people can remain patient with emotionally unavailable partners for much longer than most people would. They keep looking deeper. Forward. They think there must be a reason for the withdrawal. There must be a reason for the coldness. There must be something underneath the silence. Instead of asking only, forward, why are you treating me this way? They often ask, what happened to you that made you this way? That difference matters. Because empathy can make someone incredibly forgiving. Forward. But empathy does not make someone incapable of being hurt. And there is a lesser known truth about emotional trust. Forward. People do not usually feel betrayed simply because someone disagrees with them. They feel betrayed when something they revealed in safety later becomes a source of shame, rejection, forward, punishment, or emotional control. That is where this story becomes much deeper. The mistake is not simply saying something hurtful during an argument. Forward. It is making someone feel deeply understood and emotionally safe, encouraging them to lower their defenses, and then treating that openness as if it means nothing. In the worst cases, forward, the very vulnerability they trusted you with becomes the thing used against them. That can change everything. Forward. A person who once explained their feelings for hours may suddenly become quiet. Someone who used to chase answers may stop asking questions. Forward. Someone who constantly tried to repair the relationship may stop trying altogether. Forward. And from the outside, this can look confusing. The avoidant person may think the empath is simply upset. They may expect the usual cycle to return. Distance, silence, reconnection, forward. Emotional repair, another period of closeness. Then another withdrawal, but sometimes the cycle does not return. Forward. Sometimes the empath has reached a psychological boundary that the other person cannot see. This is especially important when looking at avoidant attachment patterns. Forward. Avoidant people are not all the same, and attachment style does not excuse harmful behavior. Forward. But people with strong avoidant tendencies can sometimes protect themselves from emotional discomfort by creating distance, minimizing emotional needs, forward, or shutting down when intimacy becomes intense. The strange part is that the emotional consequences of their behavior may not hit them immediately. Forward. They may feel relief when they create distance. The empath may feel the pain immediately. The avoidant may process it later. Forward. The difference in timing can create one of the most painful misunderstandings in relationships. One person thinks, we just need some space. The other person is slowly realizing, forward, I no longer feel emotionally safe with you. Those are completely different experiences. A super empath is often not looking for perfection. Forward. They are not necessarily demanding constant attention, endless reassurance, or a relationship without conflict. In fact, forward, many highly empathetic people can tolerate an extraordinary amount of emotional difficulty because they understand that every human being has wounds, fears, defenses, and limitations. Forward. They can forgive mistakes because they understand mistakes. They can forgive distance because they understand fear. Forward. They can forgive emotional confusion because they understand that people do not always know how to communicate what they feel. Forward. But there is a difference between being imperfect and making another person regret being vulnerable with you. That is the line. And once that line is crossed, forward, forgiveness may still exist, but trust may not return in the same form. This is something many people misunderstand about forgiveness. Forward. Forgiveness does not automatically restore access. It does not erase consequences. It does not mean that the relationship has to return to the way it was before. Forward. A person can understand your pain and still protect themselves from it. Forward. A person can forgive you and still stop trusting you. A person can love you and still decide that loving you from a distance is safer than opening their heart again. Forward. That is why this emotional mistake can be so destructive. The deepest wound is often not the argument itself. Forward. It is the realization that the person you trusted with your most sensitive emotions did not treat those emotions with care. Maybe you told them what you were afraid of. Forward. Maybe you admitted something you rarely tell anyone. Maybe you revealed an insecurity. Maybe you explained why certain behavior hurt you. Forward. Maybe you finally stopped pretending to be strong and allowed them to see the softer side of you. And instead of protecting that vulnerability, they dismissed it, mocked it, ignored it. Forward. Exposed it, or later used it during conflict. For a highly empathetic person, that moment can create a powerful internal shift. They stop asking, forward, how can I make this person understand me? They start asking, why did I trust this person with this part of me? That question is much more difficult. Forward. Because it forces them to look beyond the individual incident. They begin reviewing the entire relationship. They notice every time they explained the other person's behavior. Forward. Every time they gave another chance, every time they accepted an apology, every time they ignored their own discomfort because they believed the other person was struggling. Forward. Every time they thought patience would eventually create safety. And slowly they may realize something painful. Forward. They were giving emotional understanding to someone who was not giving them emotional security in return. This does not mean every empath is perfect. Forward. It does not mean every avoidant person is abusive or intentionally cruel. And it does not mean every relationship follows the same pattern. Forward. But attachment psychology shows us something important. Emotional safety is built through repeated experiences of responsiveness, respect, consistency, and trust. Forward. When those experiences are repeatedly broken, the nervous system can begin treating intimacy itself as unsafe. That is why the reaction may not always be another emotional conversation. Forward. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is a sudden lack of interest in explaining anything. Forward. And sometimes the person who once seemed impossible to lose simply stops fighting for the relationship. Forward. In this video, we are going to break down exactly why that happens. You will learn why super empaths can tolerate so much before reaching their limit. Forward. You will learn why betraying vulnerability can hurt more deeply than ordinary rejection. You will learn why an avoidant person may not understand the damage until much later. Forward. And most importantly, you will learn what happens inside the empath when understanding finally turns into emotional detachment. Because the final stage is not always anger. Forward. Sometimes it is something much quieter. Acceptance. The moment they stop trying to convince you to care. The moment they stop explaining what you did. Forward. The moment they realize that being understood by you is no longer worth the emotional risk. And once that happens, forward, getting their trust back may be far harder than getting their attention back. This is where avoidant psychology becomes especially revealing. Forward. Because the person who once seemed completely available may eventually become emotionally unreachable. Not because they suddenly became heartless, forward, but because they finally learned that their heart needed protection too. Welcome to the channel. If you want to understand the hidden emotional patterns behind avoidant behavior, forward, deep empathy, attachment, and relationship dynamics, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because in the next part, forward, we are going deeper into why super empaths give so many chances in the first place, forward, and why their greatest strength can sometimes become the very thing that keeps them trapped in painful emotional cycles. Forward. Highly empathetic people often do something that seems almost impossible to understand from the outside. They can be hurt by someone and still try to understand that person's pain. Forward. They can experience rejection and still wonder why the other person pulled away. They can be treated with coldness and still search for the fear hiding underneath it. Forward. Instead of immediately asking, why are you doing this? To me, they may ask, what is happening inside you? That small difference can shape an entire relationship. Forward. This is one reason a super empath may give far more chances than other people would. Their attention naturally moves toward causes. They look for the story behind the behavior. Forward. A person becomes distant, and they think there may be fear behind the distance. Someone becomes emotionally cold, and they wonder if closeness makes that person uncomfortable. Forward. Someone gives mixed signals, and they may interpret the inconsistency as emotional confusion rather than deliberate rejection. Someone becomes defensive during a serious conversation. Forward. And the empath may notice the insecurity behind the defensiveness. This ability can be deeply compassionate, but it can also become a trap. Forward. One lesser known part of empathy is that understanding another person's behavior can reduce the emotional impact of that behavior in the moment. Forward. When you understand why someone is acting badly, your brain may be more willing to excuse it. The explanation begins to compete with the consequence. Forward. Instead of focusing on what happened, you'd start focusing on why it happened. That can sound like this. They are distant because they are afraid of intimacy. Forward. They are cold because they were hurt before. They disappear because closeness overwhelms them. They push me away because they are scared of needing me. Forward. Sometimes these explanations may contain truth. Attachment patterns can influence how people respond to intimacy, conflict, and emotional dependence. Forward. Some people genuinely learned early in life to protect themselves by becoming emotionally self-reliant, or by creating distance when relationships become intense. Forward. But there is an important distinction. Understanding a behavior is not the same as accepting it. Knowing why someone hurts you does not make the hurt disappear. Forward. Knowing that someone has abandonment fears does not mean you must accept repeated rejection. Forward. Knowing that someone struggles with vulnerability does not mean you should carry the entire emotional weight of the relationship. Forward. This is where highly empathetic people can become vulnerable. They can become so focused on the other person's inner world that they lose contact with their own. Forward. They notice the other person's fear, but ignore their own fear. They understand the other person's boundaries, but overlook their own boundaries. Forward. They protect the other person's emotional comfort while quietly sacrificing their own emotional safety. Forward. And because they can see both sides of the situation, they may become the person who keeps repairing everything. When the other person pulls away, they reach out. Forward. When the other person becomes cold, they become more patient. When communications breaks down, they try to explain themselves more clearly. When the relationship becomes unstable, forward. They search for another explanation. The cycle can continue for a long time because every painful event gets converted into a reason to stay. Forward. This is where empathy can become different from healthy compassion. Healthy compassion says, I understand why you are struggling, and I still need you to treat me with respect. Forward. Unhealthy over-empathy says, I understand why you are hurting, so I should probably tolerate what this is doing to me. That difference is enormous. Forward. A super empath may not even recognize the imbalance at first. The relationship can feel emotionally deep because there are intense conversations, strong chemistry, painful separations, forward, and powerful reunions. But intensity is not the same as emotional security. In fact, unpredictable relationships can create a very powerful attachment cycle. Forward. When affection appears after periods of distance, the relief can feel unusually strong. The return of closeness may temporarily erase the memory of the pain. Forward. The empath thinks the connection is finally improving. Then the distance returns. The empath becomes patient again. Forward. The other person learns that withdrawal does not necessarily end the relationship. This is where patience can quietly become permission. Forward. Not because the empath intends to give permission. They may never consciously decide to tolerate poor treatment. But behavior is shaped by consequences. Forward. If someone repeatedly withdraws, hurts, returns, receives forgiveness, and experiences little change in the relationship, the pattern can become easier to repeat. Forward. This does not mean the avoidant person is always manipulating the empath. Many avoidant behaviors are defensive rather than calculated. Forward. A person may genuinely feel overwhelmed by emotional closeness. They may genuinely need space. They may not fully understand how deeply their withdrawal affects another person. Forward. But intention does not erase impact. That is a crucial psychological lesson. Someone can hurt you without planning to hurt you. Forward. Someone can care about you and still behave in ways that damage trust. Forward. Someone can have emotional wounds and still be responsible for how those wounds affect another person. Forward. The super empath often understands all of this before they understand one simpler truth. Their compassion needs boundaries, because without boundaries, forward, empathy can turn into emotional overfunctioning. One person keeps explaining, forgiving, repairing, and adjusting. Forward. The other person gets used to being understood without learning how to provide the same understanding in return. The relationship slowly becomes one-sided. Forward. The empath becomes the emotional translators. They explain what the other person feels. They explain why the other person behaves that way. Forward. They explain what the other person is afraid of. They explain why the relationship can still work. And somewhere in that process, they may stop asking the most important question. Forward. Who is explaining me? Who is trying to understand my fear? Who is protecting my vulnerability? Who is making space for my emotional needs? Forward. That question can remain buried for a long time, until one more painful event forces it to the surface. And when that happens, forward, the empath may begin to realize that the problem was never simply that the other person had wounds. Forward. The deeper problem was that those wounds had slowly become an excuse for the empath to keep abandoning their own needs. Forward. There is a difference between hurting someone's feelings and changing the way that person feels about emotional safety. An argument can hurt. Rejection can hurt. Even distance can hurt. Forward. But there is one kind of emotional injury that reaches much deeper. It happens when someone earns your trust, encourages you to open up, forward, and then uses the very things you revealed against you. For a highly empathetic person, this can become a turning point. The mistake is not simply being insensitive, forward. It is taking someone's vulnerability and making them regret showing it to you. This can happen in small ways at first. They finally explain why something hurts them, forward, and instead of responding with care, the other person laughs at it. They admit an insecurity, and later that insecurity becomes a sarcastic comment during an argument, forward. They reveal that they are afraid of losing the relationship, and suddenly that fear becomes something the other person uses to gain emotional control. The words may sound small, forward, but the meaning behind them is not small, forward. The message becomes, the part of you that trusted me is not safe with me. That is why this kind of betrayal can feel different from an ordinary disagreement. During a normal argument, forward, two people may disagree about facts, expectations, or behavior. Emotions can become intense. People can say things they later regret, forward. A healthy relationship can sometimes recover from conflict because the basic sense of safety remains intact. But when vulnerability itself becomes the target, forward, something more fundamental can break. The empath did not simply tell you information. They gave you access, forward. They showed you a part of themselves that they normally protect from the outside world. Maybe they told you about a painful experience from their past, forward. Maybe they admitted that rejection affects them deeply. Maybe they confessed that they sometimes feel inadequate, forward. Maybe they told you that they need reassurance because uncertainty makes them anxious. Maybe they finally admitted how much they cared. For someone who is highly empathetic, forward, revealing these things may not be casual. They may spend a long time deciding whether to say them. They may test the emotional environment first. They may watch your reaction, forward. They may choose their words carefully. They may only open up after feeling that you will not judge them. So when that vulnerability is later mocked or dismissed, forward, the injury can reach far beyond the original subject. The person may start questioning their own judgment. Why did I tell them that? Why did I trust them? Forward. Why did I let them see that side of me? Those questions can be more painful than the original conflict, forward. One of the most damaging versions of this behavior is dismissing feelings that the person previously shared in private. They may say, "You are too sensitive," forward. They may act as though the emotional need was unreasonable. They may suddenly treat something that once seemed important as dramatic or embarrassing, forward. This creates a confusing psychological experience. The empath remembers the moment when they felt understood. Now they are being told that the same feelings were never important, forward. That contradiction can slowly destroy trust, forward. Another version is withdrawing affection immediately after vulnerability. The person finally opens up, and the response is distance. They become emotionally exposed, forward, and the other person becomes colder. They ask for reassurance and the other person disappears. Even if the withdrawal is not intentional punishment, forward, the emotional brain can begin connecting openness with rejection. That connection matters because humans learn from repeated emotional experiences. Forward. If vulnerability repeatedly leads to shame, rejection, silence, or conflict, a person may eventually become more guarded. They may stop sharing. They may stop asking for reassurance. Forward. They may start editing their emotions before expressing them. And from the outside, this can look like emotional strength, but sometimes it is self-protection. Forward. The person is not necessarily feeling less. They are simply revealing less. This is one of the lesser known consequences of emotional betrayal. Forward. The person who was once highly expressive may become remarkably difficult to read. They may still care. They may still feel deeply. Forward. But they no longer believe that showing those feelings is safe. The same thing can happen when private information becomes a weapon during conflict, something shared during a quiet. Forward. Intimate conversation suddenly appears in an argument. A personal fear becomes ammunition. A past wound becomes an insult. A private confession becomes proof that the person is weak. Forward. At that moment, the empath learns something that is difficult to forget. Their emotional honesty can be turned against them. And once that lesson is learned, forward, rebuilding trust becomes much harder. This is why emotional safety is so important in close relationships. Emotional safety does not mean that nobody gets upset. Forward. It does not mean that difficult conversations disappear. It means that a person can express a feeling without fearing humiliation, retaliation, abandonment, forward, or deliberate use of that feeling against them. Without that safety, intimacy starts to shrink. Empath may become careful, then cautious, then distant. Forward. They stop telling you what they need because needing something now feels dangerous. They stop explaining when they are hurt because previous explanations were ignored. Forward. They may stop asking for reassurance because they no longer want to appear dependent. Forward. And eventually, they may stop giving you access to the emotional world you once knew so well. This is especially painful when the person who caused the damage is avoidant. Forward. An avoidant person may already struggle with emotional intensity. When a partner becomes vulnerable, they may feel pressure, discomfort, or a strong urge to create distance. Forward. They may not fully understand that their reaction can teach the other person that vulnerability is unsafe. The empath sees something different. Forward. They see that every time they open their heart, the door seems to close, so they adapt. They become quieter. They reveal less. They expect less. They need less, at least on the surface. Forward. But beneath that silence, something is changing. The empath is not simply becoming less emotional. They are updating their definition of the relationship. Forward. They are deciding what this person can be trusted with. And that is a critical difference. Trust is not only about whether someone keeps a secret. Forward. Trust also involves knowing how someone will treat you when you are emotionally exposed. It involves knowing that your fear will not become a weapon. Your tears will not become a joke. Forward. Your needs will not become a source of shame. Once that expectation collapses, the relationship can enter a completely different stage. The empath may still forgive the argument. Forward. They may forgive the harsh words. They may even understand why the other person reacted that way. But deep inside, one question begins to grow. Forward. Can I safely be myself around you anymore? And when the answer starts becoming no, the emotional distance that follows can be far more permanent than any temporary period of silence. Forward. One of the most confusing parts of an avoidant relationship is the difference between what happens inside the two people after an emotional rupture. Forward. The empath may feel that something enormous has happened. The avoidant person may seem almost untouched. They may become quieter. They may pull away. They may return to work, routines, forward, friends, or ordinary life. From the outside, it can look as though the event meant very little to them. But emotional avoidance does not always mean emotional absence. Forward. Sometimes it means the emotion has been pushed out of awareness. Forward. People with strong avoidant attachment patterns may respond to intense closeness or conflict by using what psychologists often call deactivating strategies. Forward. These strategies can include minimizing emotional needs, focusing on practical matters, creating distance, distracting themselves, forward, or convincing themselves that the relationship is not as important as it feels. The goal is not always to hurt the other person. Forward. The goal can be to reduce the discomfort created by emotional closeness. And this creates a strange psychological gap. The more intense the emotional moment becomes, forward, the more the avoidant person may feel the need to step back. The empath may want a conversation. The avoidant may want silence. The empath may want clarity. Forward. The avoidant may want distance. The empath may think, we need to talk about what just happened. The avoidant may think, we need to stop talking about it. Forward. Both people are reacting to the same event, but they are trying to regulate themselves in completely different ways. For the avoidant person, distance can provide immediate relief. Forward. When the emotional pressure disappears, their body and mind may feel calmer. The conflict is no longer directly in front of them. The uncomfortable conversation is over. Forward. The emotional demands seem quieter. That relief can be misleading because feeling better after withdrawing does not necessarily mean the problem has been solved. Forward. It can simply mean the emotional stimulus has been removed. This is one reason an avoidant person may minimize what happened. Forward. They may tell themselves that the argument was not that serious. They may focus on the fact that everyone gets emotional sometimes. Forward. They may believe that the other person will eventually calm down. They may even expect everything to return to normal without a major conversation. Forward. That expectation can become dangerous because the empath may not be trying to calm down. The empath may be processing. There is a major difference. Forward. A highly empathetic person may replay the conversation repeatedly. They may remember the exact moment they felt dismissed. They may examine the tone of voice. Forward. They may think about what they revealed and how it was received. They may compare the event with previous experiences. They are not simply asking, why did this argument happen? Forward. They are asking, what does this tell me about the safety of this relationship? Forward. That question changes everything. The avoidant person may be thinking about the event as a temporary conflict. The empath may be interpreting it as evidence. And evidence accumulates. Forward. One painful interaction may be forgiven. 2 may be explained. 10 may become a pattern. This is where delayed emotional processing becomes important. Forward. A person who avoids emotional discomfort can sometimes function very well immediately after a breakup, argument, or period of distance. They may appear calm. They may seem unaffected. Forward. They may even appear happier. But the absence of visible emotion does not prove the absence of emotional processing. Sometimes the emotional response arrives later. Forward. When there is less distraction and more psychological space, the person may suddenly remember what happened. Forward. They may begin to understand what the other person was trying to communicate. They may realize that the silence was not simply a request for space. It was a change. Forward. This is why the timing can feel so unfair. The empath may be deeply hurt today. The avoidant may fully understand the meaning of that hurt months later. By then, forward, the empath may already be somewhere completely different emotionally. This creates one of the most painful misunderstandings in avoidant relationships. Forward. Silence can mean two completely different things. To the avoidant, silence may mean, we need time. Things will settle down. To the empath, silence may mean, forward, I am learning how to live without emotional access to you. The avoidant may think the relationship is paused. The empath may be slowly ending their emotional investment. Forward. That process can happen quietly. There may be no dramatic announcement, no angry speech, no final argument. The empath simply stops reaching. At first, the change may be small. Forward. They send fewer messages. They explain less. They stop asking for reassurance. They stop trying to solve every misunderstanding. They stop chasing after emotional distance. Forward. The avoidant person may not notice immediately because they are accustomed to distance. Space feels familiar to them. But the empath is doing something very different. Forward. They are detaching. This is the turning point. The empath eventually stops trying to make the other person understand the wound. Forward. That moment can be difficult to recognize because it does not always look dramatic. The empath may still be polite. They may still care. They may still respond when contacted. Forward. But the emotional effort is gone. They are no longer building bridges. They are no longer searching for the perfect words. They are no longer thinking. Forward. Maybe if I explain it one more time, they will finally understand. That hope begins to disappear. And when hope disappears, behavior changes. Forward. The empath may realize that they have spent too much time translating their pain into language the other person can understand. They may realize that understanding cannot be forced. Forward. They may realize that an apology cannot create emotional safety if the same pattern continues. This is where something unexpected can happen. Forward. The avoidant person may finally feel the distance, not because the empath became cruel, not because the empath wanted revenge. Forward. But because the emotional energy that once surrounded the relationship has disappeared. The person who used to make the relationship feel emotionally alive is no longer doing that work. Forward. And suddenly, the avoidant may begin asking questions that the empath asked long ago. Why are they different? Why are they not reaching out? Why did they seem so calm? Forward. Why are they no longer explaining themselves? Why does the connection feel weaker? The answer may be difficult to accept. Forward. The empath may have stopped waiting for the relationship to become emotionally safe. And once that internal decision is made, the next stage is not about anger. Forward. It is about emotional detachment, where the empath begins protecting their peace instead of trying to repair the person who kept making them feel unsafe. Forward. There is a moment when an empath stops fighting for the relationship, and it does not always look like anger. In fact, the most important shift can be almost invisible. Forward. There may be no dramatic confrontation, no long message, no final attempt to prove a point. The person simply becomes quieter inside. Forward. The emotional struggle that once consumed them begins to lose its power. This is the difference between anger and emotional detachment. Anger still contains attachment. Forward. When someone is angry, they still care about the outcome. They still want to be heard. They still want an explanation. Forward. They still want the other person to understand what they did and why it hurt. Anger says, you hurt me, and I need you to recognize it. Detachment says something very different. Forward. I no longer need you to understand. That is a much deeper shift. A highly empathetic person may spend a long time trying to repair a painful relationship. Forward. They may explain themselves again and again. They may choose softer words. They may give the other person more time. Forward. They may forgive behavior that they once believed they would never tolerate. They may even rescue the relationship from consequences that the other person should have faced. Forward. But repeated emotional injuries eventually change the way a person processes the relationship. At first, they focus on individual events. This argument was bad. They were stressed. Forward. They were afraid. They did not mean it. They will understand next time. Then something changes. They stop looking at individual events and start looking at the pattern. Forward. That is often the moment the relationship begins to feel different. The empath starts connecting moments that once seemed unrelated. The disappearing, the emotional withdrawal. Forward. The broken promises, the lack of reassurance, the sudden coldness after closeness, the apologies that never lead to lasting change, the moments when vulnerability was met with distance. Forward. One event can be explained. A pattern is much harder to explain away. This is why a highly empathetic person may eventually become less interested in the reasons behind the behavior. Forward. The question changes. At first it may be, why did they do this? Later it becomes, why am I continuing to accept this? Forward. That question can be painful because it turns the attention inward. The empath is no longer trying to decode the other person. They are examining their own choices. Forward. They may realize that they spent months understanding someone else's wounds while ignoring their own. They may recognize that every time they made an excuse for harmful behavior, forward, they taught themselves to tolerate a little more. They may see that their patience was not creating safety. It was allowing the same cycle to continue. Forward. And this can create a powerful internal boundary, not a boundary designed to punish, a boundary designed to protect. Forward. There is an important difference. Revenge says, I want you to feel the pain you caused me. So self-protection says, I do not want to experience this pain again. Forward. One is focused on the other person's suffering. The other is focused on personal safety. Forward. This is why emotional detachment can look cold from the outside when it is actually a form of psychological self-preservation. The empath may still feel sadness. Forward. They may still remember the good moments. They may still care about the person. They may even understand the reasons behind the avoidant behavior. Forward. But understanding no longer controls their decisions. This is a major shift. Before, empathy was directing their behavior. Now, boundaries are. Forward. They no longer chase someone who withdraws. They no longer send long explanations after being ignored. They no longer keep proving that their intentions were good. Forward. They no longer try to convince someone that their feelings deserve respect. They stop rescuing. They stop persuading. They stop negotiating against their own emotional needs. Forward. And this can be difficult for an empath because helping others may have become part of their identity. They may be used to being the person who understands, the person who forgives. Forward. The person who gives another chance. The person who stays when everyone else walks away. So when they finally step back, they may feel guilty. Forward. They may wonder whether they are being selfish. They may question whether they should give one more chance. Forward. But emotional growth sometimes means learning that compassion without limits can become self-abandonment. A person can care deeply and still say no. Forward. A person can understand trauma and still reject harmful behavior. A person can recognize someone's fear and still refuse to become responsible for managing that fear. Forward. A person can love someone and still decide that emotional access must be earned through consistent behavior. That last point is especially important. Forward. Trust is not restored because someone says they are sorry. Trust is restored through repeated experiences that contradict the old pattern. Forward. If someone repeatedly made vulnerability feel dangerous, then the opposite must become consistent. Respect must replace mockery. Safety must replace punishment. Forward. Communication must replace disappearance. Accountability must replace excuses. Without that change, the empath may continue moving away. Forward. Not because they want to hurt anyone, because their nervous system has learned something. Opening up to this person has a cost. And once that lesson becomes strong enough, forward, emotional openness begins to disappear. The empath may stop sharing their deepest fears. They may stop describing their needs. Forward. They may stop revealing what they are feeling in real time. They may become careful about what they say because they no longer trust how that information will be received. Forward. This can be mistaken for indifference. It is often the opposite. Indifference means the person no longer cares. Forward. Detachment means the person cares, but no longer wants their emotional safety to depend on someone else's behavior. That is why the final emotional shift can be so powerful. Forward. The empath does not necessarily stop loving. They stop expecting. They stop expecting the apology. They stop expecting the sudden transformation. They stop expecting the sudden transformation. Forward. They stop expecting the avoidant person to finally become the emotionally available partner they hoped they could become. And when expectation disappears, forward, chasing often disappears with it. The relationship can suddenly feel strangely quiet. There is no longer a battle inside the empath between hope and disappointment. Forward. They have started accepting what the pattern has been showing them. This is also why an avoidant person may become confused later. Forward. They may be accustomed to the empath returning out after the distance. They may expect another conversation, another attempt, another emotional rescue. Forward. But the old version of the empath may no longer exist. The person who once kept opening the door may still be standing there. They simply may no longer be willing to walk through it. Forward. And that is when the consequences of emotional harm can become impossible to ignore. Forgiveness is often treated as the final step after someone gets hurt. Forward. People say that if you truly forgive, everything should go back to normal. But emotional trust does not work that way. Forgiveness, reconciliation, forward, and trust are three different things. A person can forgive you and still choose not to return to the relationship. Forward. They can understand why you behaved badly and still decide that you no longer deserve access to their deepest emotions. Forward. This distinction becomes especially important for a highly empathetic person. Forward. A super empath may understand the fear behind an avoidant person's behavior. They may understand why intimacy became overwhelming. Forward. They may recognize that emotional withdrawal can be connected to old wounds, learned defenses, or a strong need for independence. Forward. They may even feel compassion for the person who hurt them, but compassion does not erase consequences. Understanding someone is not the same as trusting them. Forward. Forgiving someone is not the same as feeling safe with them. And loving someone is not the same as giving them unlimited access to you. Forward. This is where many people misunderstand the final stage of emotional healing. The empath may not need revenge. They may not need the other person to suffer. Forward. They may not even need an apology anymore. They may simply need distance. That can be difficult for the other person to understand because forgiveness can happen privately. Forward. The empath may eventually say to themselves, I understand why you did what you did. I no longer need to carry anger about it. But another thought can exist beside that one. Forward. I still cannot trust you with my heart. Both can be true. Forgiveness can release resentment. Trust requires evidence. That evidence is built through behavior. Forward. If someone repeatedly apologizes and then repeats the same pattern, the apology slowly loses emotional power. The words may still sound sincere. The emotions may still be real. Forward. But the nervous system pays attention to repetition. The first apology may create hope. The second apology may create caution. The 10th apology may create exhaustion. Forward. This is why betrayal of vulnerability can be so difficult to repair. The problem is not only what happened in one moment. Forward. The problem is that the person learned something about the safety of the relationship. They learned that opening up may lead to pain. Forward. They learned that private feelings may become public weapons. They learned that asking for reassurance may distance. Forward. They learned that emotional closeness may be followed by withdrawal. Once those lessons become deeply rooted, a simple apology may not be strong enough to reverse them. Forward. Real repair requires more than words. It requires accountability. It requires the ability to say, I did this, and I understand how it affected you. Forward. Without immediately defending the behavior, it requires consistent change. Forward. It requires respecting boundaries, even when those boundaries are uncomfortable. It requires emotional patience. And most importantly, forward, it requires repeated experiences of safer time. This is the part many people underestimate. Trust is not rebuilt during one emotional conversation. Forward. It is rebuilt in ordinary moments. Someone follows through when they said they would. Someone respects a boundary without becoming angry. Forward. Someone stays present during an uncomfortable conversation. Someone does not punish vulnerability. Someone does not disappear every time emotions become intense. Forward. These small moments may seem unimportant, but they are the building blocks of emotional safety. The opposite is also true. Repeated cycles of hurt, apology, closeness, forward, and withdrawal can slowly destroy trust even when affection remains. This creates one of the most painful relationship situations. Two people can still love each other. Forward. They can still miss each other. They can still feel strong chemistry. They can still remember beautiful moments. Forward. And yet one person may no longer feel emotionally safe enough to return. That is why love alone cannot always repair a relationship. Love can keep someone attached. Forward. Trust determines whether they can relax inside that attachment. Without trust, love can become exhausting. The empath may constantly monitor the other person's behavior. Forward. They may wonder when the next withdrawal will happen. They may hesitate before sharing something personal. They may think carefully before asking for reassurance. Forward. They may hold back their feelings because they remember what happened the last time they became vulnerable. The relationship can still exist. Forward. But the emotional freedom inside the relationship is gone. And this is where the difference between reconciliation and emotional access becomes important. Forward. Someone can allow another person back into their life without giving them the same emotional position they once had. They may speak again. They may become friendly again. Forward. They may even rebuild a connection, but the deepest part of the relationship may remain protected. That is not necessarily punishment. It can be a boundary based on experience. Forward. The empath may think, I already showed you who I was. You showed me what you did with that trust. Now I have to make a different choice. Forward. That choice can feel harsh to someone who expects forgiveness to erase the past. Forward. But forgiveness does not erase memory, and memory can protect us. Every relationship teaches the brain what to expect from another person. If closeness repeatedly produces safety, the brain becomes more comfortable with closeness. If closeness repeatedly produces rejection or humiliation, the brain becomes more cautious. Forward. This is why emotional safety has to be demonstrated, not promised. A person can say, you can trust me. But trust is not created by the sentence. Forward. It is created by what happens after the sentence. Do they respect your vulnerability? Do they remain kind when you disagree? Do they stay emotionally present when you need support? Forward. Do they take responsibility when they cause harm? Do they change the behavior that caused the wound? These are the things that matter. For the empath, forward, the final boundary may therefore sound very different from hatred. It may not be, I hate you. It may not even be, you are a bad person. It may simply be, forward, I no longer feel safe enough to love you the same way. That sentence carries enormous emotional weight because it does not deny the love that existed. Forward. It recognizes that something changed. The empath may still remember the connection with tenderness. They may still hope the other person grows. Forward. They may still understand the wounds that shaped the avoidant behavior, but they no longer want to sacrifice their emotional safety to prove that their love is real. Forward. And once the empath reaches that point, something unexpected can happen. The person who once believed the relationship would always be there may finally begin to feel its absence. Forward. A super empath can forgive more than most people realize. They can forgive distance. They can forgive mistakes. They can forgive emotional confusion. Forward. They can even forgive someone who hurt them deeply, especially when they understand the fear or wounds behind that behavior. But forgiveness has a boundary. Forward. When someone takes the vulnerability you trusted them with and turns it into a weapon, something much deeper can change. The relationship may never feel the same again. Forward. Because the real injury was not only what happened, it was the message behind it. You was the part of me that needed protection. And you made that part of me feel unsafe. Forward. That is why the final boundary of a super empath is often not built from hatred. It is built from self-respect. Forward. They may still care. They may still remember the good moments. They may still understand why the other person behaved the way they did. Forward. But understanding no longer means accepting the same treatment. And this is one of the most important lessons about empathy. Empathy without boundaries can become self-abandonment. Forward. You can understand someone's pain without carrying it for them. You can. You can respect someone's fear without allowing that fear to control your life. Forward. You can forgive someone's past without giving them unlimited access to your present. True. Emotional safety requires more than strong feelings. It requires reciprocity. Forward. It requires accountability. It requires respect. It requires two people who are willing to protect the trust between them. especially when emotions become difficult. Forward. A relationship cannot survive on one person's patience forever. Eventually, the person who keeps understanding needs to feel understood too. Forward. The person who keeps forgiving needs to feel respected too. The person who keeps opening their heart needs to know that their vulnerability will not become ammunition later. Forward. And when that safety disappears, the most powerful change may not be the moment the empath walks away. Forward. It may be the moment they stop needing the other person to understand why they are walking away. They stop explaining. They stop proving. They stop waiting for the perfect apology. Forward. They stop hoping that one final conversation will make everything clear. They simply know. They know what they experienced. They know what they tolerated. They know what it cost them. Forward. And they know what they will never accept again. That is not cruelty. That is growth. Forward. Sometimes the deepest form of closure is realizing that you do not need someone else to validate the wound they created. You can forgive without returning. Forward. You can love without chasing. You can understand without excusing. And you can walk away without hatred. So if this message connected with something you have experienced, forward. Remember this. Your empathy is a strength, but your boundaries are what protect that strength. You can forgive someone for hurting you. Forward. But you do not have to keep giving them access to the part of you they proved they could not protect. Forward. If this video helped you understand your own emotional patterns more clearly, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There is much more to uncover about attachment, forward, emotional safety, and the hidden psychology behind the people we struggle to understand, forward. Because sometimes the person who finally stops explaining their pain is not the person who stopped caring, forward. They are the person who finally learned that their peace deserves protection too.